I woke up to something scratching at the walls. Not like a branch scraping against wood. This was deliberate, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging down the outside of the cabin, starting high and working their way down in slow, measured strokes. I sat up in Stanley's narrow bunk, my rational brain already working overtime. Wind could make branches do weird things. Old wood settled and creaked. There were probably a dozen logical explanations for the sound, and I was going to find one of them. The scratching stopped. I checked my watch, 3:17 a.m. Perfect. Nothing good ever happened at 3 a.m., even in completely normal situations that didn't involve mysterious emails about antlered creatures, which this obviously was. I waited in the dark, listening. The tower was silent except for the usual forest sounds filtering through the windows. No more scratching. See? Totally explainable. Probably a raccoon or something. Then I heard the voice. "Hunter." Soft, almost whispered, coming from somewhere outside the cabin. "Hunter, are you awake?" My blood went cold. Someone was out there. Someone who knew my name. I slipped out of bed and crept to the window, staying low. The forest stretched out below me, dark and still. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, creating patches of silver and shadow, but I couldn't see anyone. "Hunter." The voice came again, from a different direction this time. "Come outside. We need to talk." Okay, this was officially not funny anymore. If this was some kind of hazing ritual, it had crossed the line from harmless prank into genuinely creepy territory. Who the hell was wandering around a remote forest at 3 in the morning just to mess with the new guy? I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the door, then stopped. That stupid email flashed through my mind. Something about not going outside after dark, not responding to voices, ridiculous rules that I'd laughed at just hours ago. But standing there in the dark, listening to someone call my name from the woods, those rules didn't seem quite so ridiculous anymore. "Hunter, please." The voice was closer now, right at the base of the tower. "I know you can hear me." I pressed my face to the window and aimed my flashlight down. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing around the tower's base. Nothing, no one there. But the voice had definitely come from that direction. "Look, whoever you are," I called out, loud enough to be heard but trying to keep my voice steady. "This isn't funny. It's the middle of the night." Silence. I waited, flashlight beams sweeping back and forth across the clearing. Still nothing. Maybe they'd given up and left. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing, stress from the long hike, sleeping in a strange place, all those weird warnings rattling around in my subconscious. Then something moved at the edge of my light. Just a flash of movement between the trees, there and gone so quickly I almost missed it. But I'd definitely seen something. Something tall. My hands were shaking as I adjusted the flashlight beam, trying to find whatever I'd glimpsed. The light swept across tree trunks and undergrowth, revealing nothing but normal forest. No people, no animals, nothing that could explain what I'd seen. "Hunter." The voice again, but different now. Distorted somehow, like it was coming from underwater. "Why won't you come outside?" That's when I noticed the smell. It drifted through the window, sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. But underneath that was something else. Something that made my stomach turn. Decay. Rot. The smell of things that had been dead for a long time. I backed away from the window, my rational mind scrambling for explanations. Dead animal nearby, stagnant water, decomposing vegetation, all perfectly normal forest smells that seemed worse because I was scared and my imagination was running wild. But that voice calling my name wasn't my imagination. I grabbed my phone, hoping against hope that I might have enough signal to call someone. Anyone. The ranger station, 911, even my parents back in Portland. But the screen showed the same thing it had all day. No service. The cell booster. I'd found it yesterday but left it turned off. If I could get it running, maybe I could call for help. I crept across the cabin to where I'd left the device, trying to move quietly. The last thing I wanted was to let whoever was outside know exactly where I was in the tower. "Hunter, I'm getting impatient." The voice was right outside the window now, close enough that if there was actually someone there, I should be able to see them clearly. But when I looked, the clearing was still empty. My hands fumbled with the signal booster, trying to remember how Stanley had said it worked. There was a power switch on the side, and what looked like an antenna that needed to be extended. Simple enough. I flicked the switch and watched a small LED light up green. The antenna extended with a soft whirring sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet cabin. "That's better," the voice said, and now it sounded pleased. "Much better." I checked my phone. 2 bars. Not great, but enough to make a call. I dialed the emergency number from Stanley's note, the one that was supposed to reach someone named Janet who knew the truth about this place. It rang once, twice. "Hunter?" A woman's voice, alert despite the early hour. "Is this Hunter Price?" "Yes," I whispered, relief flooding through me. "There's someone outside the tower. They've been calling my name, but I can't see anyone. I think—" "Listen to me very carefully," she interrupted, her voice sharp with urgency. "Do not go outside. Do not open the door. Do not look directly at any lights you might see in the forest." My blood turned to ice. "How did you—" "Did you turn on the signal booster?" I looked at the device, its green light blinking steadily. "Yes, just now. How did you know?" "Turn it off. Right now." "But I need it to call you—" "Turn it off!" Her voice was almost a shout. "The electromagnetic field attracts them. You've made yourself a target." Them, not him. Not whoever was outside. Them. "I don't understand," I said, but I was already reaching for the power switch. "What are you talking about? Who's out there?" "I'll explain everything, but first you need to turn off that booster and follow the rules exactly. Did Stanley leave you the protocols?" "The email. Those ridiculous rules about hiding from creatures and not going outside. Rules I'd dismissed as an elaborate prank." "You mean the email from B. Peterson? Those were real?" "Every word. Now turn off the booster," and the line went dead. I stared at my phone. No signal. The call had dropped the moment I'd mentioned the email. Outside, something laughed. It wasn't a human laugh. It was too high, too musical, like wind chimes made of bone. And it was coming from multiple directions at once, as if whatever was out there had surrounded the tower. I switched off the signal booster with shaking hands, plunging the cabin back into electronic silence. The green light died, and with it, my connection to the outside world. The laughter stopped. I stood in the darkness, flashlight clutched in one hand, phone useless in the other, trying to process what had just happened. Janet, whoever she was, had known exactly what was going on. She'd known about the signal booster, about the rules, about whatever was outside calling my name, which meant the rules weren't a prank. I fumbled for the printed email, scanning the bizarre instructions by flashlight. Don't go outside after dark. Don't respond to voices calling your name. Don't look directly at bright lights in the forest. If you see something with antlers, close your eyes and count to 30. Antlers. I thought about that flash of movement I had seen at the edge of my light. Something tall. Something that had moved wrong. Too fluid for a person. Too purposeful for an animal. Hunter. The voice was back, but different again. Closer. I know you're listening. I know you're afraid. I closed my eyes and started counting, just like the rules said. 1, 2, 3. You can't hide in there forever. 4, 5, 6. The scratching started again, but now it was all around the tower. Multiple sets of claws or fingernails dragging against wood, creating a symphony of scraping that made my skin crawl. 7, 8, 9. We just want to talk. 10, 11, 12. The smell was getting stronger, that sickly sweet decay that made my throat close up. It was seeping through the windows, filling the cabin with the stench of death and rotting flowers. 13, 14, 15. Something heavy landed on the roof above me. The whole tower shook with the impact, and I heard the sound of claws scrabbling against metal. 16, 17, 18. Open your eyes, Hunter. Look at us. 19, 20, 21. The scratching was getting more frantic, more aggressive. Whatever was out there was losing patience. 22, 23, 24. Look at us! The voice was a shriek now, inhuman and furious. The tower shook again as something else landed on the roof, then another. The scratching became a thunderous drumming as multiple creatures clawed at the walls. 25, 26, 27. I could hear them moving around the cabin, circling like predators. The smell was so strong now that I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. 28, 29. The drumming stopped. 30. I opened my eyes. The cabin was silent. The smell was gone. My flashlight beam revealed nothing but the familiar interior of the lookout tower, Stanley's jacket on the chair, his cold coffee on the desk, everything exactly as I'd found it. I crept to the window and looked out. The clearing was empty. The forest was still. If I hadn't been wide awake and terrified out of my mind, I might have convinced myself I'd dreamed the whole thing. But my hands were still shaking, and the memory of that inhuman laughter was burned into my brain. I spent the rest of the night sitting in Stanley's chair, flashlight in my lap, staring out at the forest and trying to make sense of what had happened. Every rational explanation I could think of fell apart under scrutiny. Mass hallucination didn't explain how Janet had known exactly what was going on. Elaborate prank didn't explain the coordination required, or how anyone could have made those sounds. Which left me with the impossible truth that I'd spent my entire adult life refusing to accept. There were things in these woods that didn't belong in any biology textbook, things that the rules were designed to help me survive, and I was stuck up here with them for the next 3 months. As dawn broke over the Cascade Range, painting the forest in shades of gold and green, I finally understood why Stanley had left in such a hurry. The only question was whether I'd be smart enough to do the same. The morning sun streaming through the cabin windows made last night feel like a fever dream. I sat at Stanley's desk, staring at the signal booster I'd switched off in panic just hours ago. In daylight, it looked harmless. Just a black plastic box with a stubby antenna and a single LED that wasn't glowing anymore. My phone showed 0 bars, same as yesterday. Same as it would probably show for the next 3 months unless I did something about it. I picked up the device, turning it over in my hands. Janet had told me to turn it off because the electromagnetic field attracted them. But in the rational light of morning, that sounded insane. Electromagnetic fields didn't attract anything except maybe some confused birds. And them could have meant anything. Bears, coyotes, even just local troublemakers who knew how to mess with the new guy. The scratching and voices from last night had probably been exactly that. Some kind of elaborate hazing ritual that got out of hand. People did crazy stuff when they were bored, and what was more boring than living near a remote fire tower? I needed to call Janet back anyway. Get some real answers about what was going on here, not cryptic warnings about following mysterious rules. And to do that, I needed a signal. I flipped the power switch. The LED blinked green, and the antenna extended with that same soft, whirring sound. Within seconds, my phone showed 2 bars. Not great, but workable. I dialed the number from Stanley's note again, half expecting it to go straight to voicemail during normal business hours. Cascade Ranger Station, this is Janet. It's Hunter Price, from the tower. A pause. Hunter, are you all right? What happened after we got disconnected? That's what I want to know. You told me to turn off the signal booster, said something about electromagnetic fields and creatures. What the hell was that about? Another pause, longer this time. You're using the booster right now, aren't you? I looked at the blinking green light. I need answers, Janet. Real ones. Not some cryptic warning about rules and protocols. Hunter, listen to me. I know this sounds crazy, but that tower has a special situation. There have been incidents over the years. Strange incidents. The protocols exist for a reason. What kind of incidents? Lookouts quitting without notice, equipment malfunctions, wildlife behaving aggressively. Her voice was careful, like she was choosing each word. The area has some unique environmental factors that can be dangerous if you're not prepared. Environmental factors. That was bureaucrat speak for, I'm not telling you the real story. What about Stanley? Did he quit because of these environmental factors? Stanley left for personal reasons, family emergency. Then why did he leave all his stuff behind? His wallet, his keys, even his coffee mug? Silence on the other end. I could practically hear her thinking. Look, she finally said, I'm going to send someone up to check on you. Terry Santiago. He's our wildlife specialist. He knows the area better than anyone, and he can explain the situation better than I can over the phone. When? This afternoon. In the meantime, please be careful. Follow the protocols in that email, even if they seem strange. And Hunter? Yeah? Try not to use the signal booster unless it's an emergency. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, frustrated. Every answer just led to more questions, and everyone seemed determined to talk around whatever was really going on here. I left the booster running. If Terry was coming up this afternoon, I wanted to be able to call for help if this turned out to be some kind of setup. 2 bars wasn't much, but it was better than being completely cut off. I spent the morning trying to focus on normal lookout duties, checking the weather instruments, scanning the horizon for smoke, updating the logbook. But I kept finding myself watching the forest, looking for any sign of movement or disturbance. Around noon, I noticed it. Nothing dramatic, just a sense that something had changed. The birds seemed quieter. The usual rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush had stopped. Even the wind felt different, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a sharp crack, like a large branch breaking. It came from the north side of the tower, maybe 50 yards out. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the tree line, but couldn't see anything obvious. Another crack, this time from the east. Then a low call, almost like a bird, but not quite right. Too deep, too sustained. I checked my watch, 12:30. Terry wasn't supposed to arrive until afternoon, but maybe he was early. Maybe he was making those sounds to announce his approach, some kind of wildlife expert thing. But the sounds were coming from multiple directions now. Branches breaking, those weird calls, and underneath it all, a rustling that suggested something large moving through the trees. My phone buzzed, text message from an unknown number. On my way up, should be there in 20 minutes. Terry, 20 minutes. The sounds in the forest were getting closer. I kept watching through the binoculars, sweeping back and forth across the tree line. There, movement between 2 large firs. Something dark and tall, there for just a second before disappearing behind the trunk. Could be Terry, I told myself. Could be a bear. Could be anything. But it had moved wrong. Too fluid, too purposeful. The rustling stopped. The forest went completely silent, like someone had thrown a switch. Even the wind died down, leaving the trees motionless. That's when I saw him, a man in work clothes emerging from the trail on the south side of the clearing. He moved carefully, constantly looking around like he expected something to jump out at him. Terry, I assumed. He looked like what I'd expect from a wildlife specialist. Weathered, practical, alert. But there was something in his posture that made me nervous. He wasn't just being careful. He was scared. I climbed down from the tower to meet him. As I got closer, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept darting to the tree line. "Hunter?" He extended a hand, but his attention was still on the forest around us. "Terry Santiago. Janet sent me." "Thanks for coming. I was starting to think I was going crazy up here." He looked at me sharply. "You turned on the booster, didn't you?" The question caught me off guard. "How did you—" I could tell from how worked up they were during my walk up here. He was already moving toward the tower, gesturing for me to follow. They always get agitated when there's extra electrical stuff running. There was that word again. "What do you mean, they?" Terry didn't answer until we were inside the cabin. He went straight to the signal booster and switched it off, watching the green light die with obvious relief. "The wildlife," he said, but something in his tone suggested he was being careful with his words. "Electromagnetic fields mess with their navigation, makes them aggressive." "What kind of wildlife?" He looked out the window, scanning the tree line. "The kind you don't want to meet after dark. We need to get out of here before sunset." "Get out? This is my job. I can't just leave." "You can tonight." Terry was already gathering some of my gear. Water bottle, flashlight, the emergency radio. The electrical activity from the booster has made the area too risky for staying overnight. "We'll go down to one of the ranger cabins and I'll explain everything." I wanted to argue, but the fear in his voice was genuine. And those sounds I'd heard earlier, the movement in the trees, maybe he was right to be cautious. Fine. But I want real answers, not more bureaucratic double talk about environmental factors. Terry nodded grimly. "You'll get them. More than you probably want." We packed quickly and headed down the trail. Terry set a fast pace, constantly checking behind us. About halfway down, he finally started talking. "This tower has a history," he said, not slowing down. "Bad history. Lookouts who quit without warning, strange incidents, equipment failures. It goes back decades." Janet mentioned something like that. "What kind of incidents?" "People seeing things that shouldn't be there, hearing voices, equipment getting destroyed overnight." He paused at a switchback, listening to the forest around us. "Most people last a few weeks before they can't take it anymore." "And Stanley?" "Stanley lasted longer than most. 12 years. But even he had his limits." We reached the ranger cabin just as the sun was setting behind the mountains. It was a small, sturdy building with solar panels on the roof and a radio antenna. Terry unlocked the door and ushered me inside quickly, like he didn't want to spend any more time outside than necessary. The interior was basic but comfortable. A few bunks, a small kitchen, a desk with communication equipment. Terry immediately went to the radio and called in our location. "Base, this is Santiago. I'm at Cabin 7 with the new lookout. We'll be staying here tonight. Over." "Copy that, Terry. Everything all right up there? Over." Terry glanced at me. "Just some equipment issues at the tower. We'll sort it out tomorrow. Over." "Understood. Check in at 0800. Over and out." Terry turned off the radio and finally seemed to relax a little. He pulled 2 beers from a small refrigerator and handed me one. "Okay," I said, settling into a chair. "Real answers. What's really going on up there?" Terry took a long drink before answering. "You ever hear of Bryce Peterson?" I thought about the email signature. "B. Peterson?" He sent me those rules. "Bryce was a lookout here about 10 years ago. Smart guy, used to be some kind of researcher. He started documenting weird stuff that happened around the tower. Strange sounds, equipment malfunctions, sightings of things that didn't make sense." "What kind of things?" "Animals that moved wrong. Lights in the forest that weren't campfires or flashlights. Voices calling from empty woods." Terry's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. Bryce wrote it all down, tried to find patterns. He came up with those rules you got in the email. Where is he now? Terry's expression darkened. Nobody knows. One day he just vanished, left everything behind. Clothes, research notes, even his truck. Never seen again. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. And you think what happened to him might happen to other lookouts. I think Bryce figured out something important about that place, and I think it got him killed. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling over me. Outside, the forest was coming alive with night sounds, owls calling, branches creaking in the wind, normal sounds that suddenly seemed ominous. The rules, I said finally. Are they real? Do they actually work? Terry nodded. Every single one. Bryce tested them, refined them, wrote them down in his own blood, you might say. They're the difference between making it through the night and ending up like him. But what are they protecting me from? Terry finished his beer and crushed the can. That's the million-dollar question. Bryce had theories, electromagnetic anomalies, unusual wildlife behavior, maybe even some kind of undiscovered species. But theories don't matter when you're up there alone in the dark. So what do I do? Quit like everyone else? That's up to you. But if you stay, you follow those rules exactly. No exceptions, no testing, no trying to be clever. Bryce was clever, and look where it got him. I thought about the scratching sounds, the voices calling my name, that inhuman laughter, about the movement I'd seen in the trees and the way the forest had gone silent when Terry arrived. What if I want to document things like Bryce did? Try to understand what's happening? Terry looked at me like I'd suggested jumping off a cliff. Then you'll end up just as dead as he did. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved, Hunter. Some things are better left alone. But even as he said it, I could see something in his eyes. Curiosity. The same need to understand that was already eating at me. We spent the rest of the evening going over the rules in detail. Terry explained each one, gave examples of what happened when people broke them, shared stories of close calls and narrow escapes. By the time we went to bed, I had a much clearer picture of what I was dealing with, and I was more determined than ever to figure out what was really happening up there. The next morning, Terry walked me back up to the tower. The forest seemed normal again. Birds singing, squirrels chattering, sunlight filtering through the canopy. It was hard to believe that anything dangerous could exist in such a peaceful place. But as we climbed the trail, I noticed things I'd missed before. Scratches on tree trunks that were too high and too deep to be from any normal animal. Areas where the undergrowth was flattened in strange patterns. And everywhere, that faint smell of decay and rotting flowers that I'd first noticed during the night. You smell that? I asked Terry. He nodded grimly. It's stronger today. The electrical activity from yesterday stirred things up. We reached the tower, and Terry did a quick inspection of the perimeter before declaring it safe. But as he prepared to leave, he grabbed my shoulder. Remember what I told you. Follow the rules. Don't try to be a hero. And if things get too weird, get out. No job is worth your life. I watched him disappear down the trail, then climbed back up to the cabin. Everything was exactly as we'd left it. The signal booster switched off, my gear scattered around, Stanley's belongings still in their places. But something felt different. The air seemed charged, like the moment before a thunderstorm. And when I looked out at the forest, I could swear I saw movement in the shadows between the trees. I thought about Bryce Peterson, documenting strange incidents and trying to solve an impossible mystery. About Stanley, lasting 12 years before whatever was out there finally drove him away. And I wondered how long I would last before I either figured out the truth or became another cautionary tale for the next lookout. Terry was already packing his gear when I woke up, moving with the kind of urgent efficiency that made my stomach drop. You're leaving? I sat up in the narrow bunk, checking my watch. 6:30 in the morning. I thought you were going to explain more about what's happening here. He didn't look at me, just kept shoving equipment into his backpack. Change of plans. What I saw yesterday was worse than I expected. What do you mean, worse? Terry finally stopped packing and turned to face me. His expression was grim. The way they were moving, the sounds they were making, it's different from before. More aggressive, more coordinated. I thought about the scratching sounds from 2 nights ago, the voices calling my name. How can you tell? I've been dealing with this situation for 6 years, Hunter. I know the patterns. He shouldered his pack and headed for the door. I need to get back to Janet immediately. Start preparing emergency protocols. Emergency protocols for what? For getting you out of here safely if things get worse. He paused at the door. I'm not abandoning you, okay? But I need to coordinate a proper response, and that means reporting back to base. The cabin felt suddenly empty after he left. I made coffee and tried to focus on normal morning routines, but Terry's urgency had left me on edge. Whatever he'd seen or heard during his walk up here yesterday had genuinely spooked him. My phone buzzed. New email from bpeterson@cascadefire.gov. Subject: Immediate protocols. Hunter. Situation escalating. Follow these rules exactly. 1. Do not use electrical devices after sunset. 2. If you hear your name called, do not respond. 3. If you see lights in the forest, close your eyes and count to 54. Do not look directly at anything with antlers. 5. If they get inside, use the emergency flare kit under Stanley's desk. Janet knows more than she's telling you. Ask her about the research project. Stay alive. B. Peterson. I stared at the email, my coffee growing cold. The rules were similar to the first message, but more specific, more urgent. And that line about Janet. What research project? I tried calling the ranger station but got voicemail. Left a message asking Janet to call me back, then spent the morning pacing around the cabin and checking the forest through binoculars. Everything looked normal, but Terry's words kept echoing in my head. More aggressive, more coordinated. Around noon, my phone rang. Hunter, it's Janet. I got your message. I need to talk to you. In person. There's stuff happening here that doesn't make sense. And I got another email from B. Peterson that mentioned some kind of research project. A long pause. What exactly did the email say? I read it to her word for word. When I finished, the silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Janet, I'm here. Listen, you're right. We need to talk face to face, but not at the tower. Can you meet me at the ranger station in town? Why not here? Because it's not safe there anymore, especially after dark, and we need to have this conversation somewhere secure. The drive down took 2 hours, winding through mountain roads that seemed to go on forever. I kept checking my rearview mirror, though I wasn't sure what I expected to see following me. The ranger station was a low, modern building surrounded by parking lots and informational signs about local wildlife. Normal, bureaucratic. The kind of place where the most dangerous thing you'd encounter was paperwork. Janet was waiting in the lobby, but she looked different from how I'd imagined her during our phone calls. Older, more tired, like someone carrying a weight she couldn't put down. Hunter. She shook my hand, then immediately started walking toward the back of the building. Come on, we need privacy for this conversation. She led me to a small conference room and closed the door. On the table was a manila folder thick with documents and what looked like personal belongings. A wallet, keys, a coffee-stained notebook. Stanley's things, she said, noticing my stare. The real ones, not the stuff we left at the tower. My blood went cold. What do you mean, the stuff you left? Janet sat down heavily and gestured for me to do the same. Stanley didn't quit, Hunter. He didn't leave in a hurry because of a family emergency. He died up there 3 weeks ago. The room seemed to tilt. Died how? The same way Bryce Peterson died 10 years ago. the same way 4 other lookouts have died over the past 30 years. She opened the folder and pulled out a photograph. This is what we're really dealing with. The photo was grainy, obviously taken at night with some kind of infrared camera. It showed the area around the tower, but there were shapes in the image that didn't belong. Tall, impossibly thin figures standing between the trees and their heads. Jesus Christ. I pushed the photo away. What are those things? We don't know exactly, but we know where they came from. Janet pulled out another document, this one with an official government seal. In 1974, the Department of Defense conducted a series of classified experiments in that area. Project Frequency. They were testing the effects of electromagnetic fields on wildlife behavior. I thought about the signal booster, how Janet had told me to turn it off because it attracted them. The experiments went wrong, she continued. Instead of just affecting behavior, the electromagnetic exposure caused permanent changes in the local ecosystem. Mutations, adaptations, things that shouldn't exist. And the government just left them there. What else could they do? The changes were irreversible, and the creatures were contained to a relatively small area. So they classified the whole thing, built the fire tower as a monitoring station, and started a long-term observation program. The pieces were starting to fit together. That's why the tower has all that extra equipment. It's not just for fire watching. Exactly. Every lookout for the past 40 years has been unknowingly collecting data on the creature's behavior and population. The real fire monitoring is done by satellite now. I thought about Bryce Peterson, documenting strange incidents and trying to solve the mystery. And Bryce was part of this? Bryce was one of the original researchers on Project Frequency. After the official program ended, he volunteered to stay as a lookout to continue studying the long-term effects. He lasted 8 years before. She gestured at the photo. Before they killed him. The creatures don't usually attack unless someone breaks the behavioral protocols. But Bryce got careless, started taking risks to gather data. And Stanley. She pulled out another item from the folder, a smartphone with a cracked screen. Stanley recorded his final moments. She pressed play on a video file. The screen showed the interior of the tower cabin at night, lit only by a flashlight. Stanley's voice was barely a whisper. Day 4380. Something's different tonight. They're more active than I've ever seen. I can hear them moving around the base of the tower, but they're not following the usual patterns. The camera moved to the window. In the darkness outside, lights were moving between the trees. Not flashlights or campfires. Something else. Something that pulsed and shifted like living things. I know I'm not supposed to look directly at the lights, Stanley's voice continued, but I need to document this behavior change for whoever comes after me. No, I whispered, knowing what was about to happen. On the screen, Stanley moved closer to the window. The lights were getting brighter, more intense, and then he looked directly at them. The video dissolved into static and screaming. Janet turned off the phone. We found his body the next morning. Terry had to clean up the scene and stage it to look like Stanley had quit suddenly. Left his personal belongings scattered around to support the story. I felt sick. And you were going to send me up there without telling me any of this? The program is ending, Hunter. Budget cuts. After 40 years, the government has decided the monitoring isn't worth the cost anymore. You were supposed to be the last lookout, just keeping the station operational for a few more months while they figured out how to shut everything down. But something changed. Janet nodded grimly. The electromagnetic field that keeps the creatures contained is breaking down. They're becoming more aggressive, expanding their territory. And worse, they're starting to venture beyond the containment area. I thought about the email from B. Peterson, the rules that had kept me alive during my first night. What about the automated emails? You said Bryce died 10 years ago. Janet looked genuinely confused. What automated emails? We shut down all of Bryce's systems after his death. It assured me everything was wiped clean. A chill ran down my spine. If the government had shut down Bryce's systems, then who was sending me those messages? Outside the conference room windows, the sun was setting behind the mountains. Soon it would be dark, and I was supposed to be back at the tower, following rules sent by a dead man to survive creatures that shouldn't exist. So what happens now? I asked. Janet closed the folder and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Now you decide whether you want to quit like a smart person or go back up there and help us figure out how to contain this situation before it gets worse. I thought about Stanley's final video, about Bryce Peterson's mysterious emails, about the scratching sounds and inhuman laughter that had terrified me just 2 nights ago. If I go back, what are my chances of surviving? If you follow the rules exactly and don't try to be a hero, maybe 50-50. And if I quit, then we lose our last chance to understand what's happening up there before the whole area becomes too dangerous to approach. I stared at Stanley's belongings on the table. The wallet, the keys, the notebook filled with observations about creatures that had ultimately killed him. Somewhere in those woods, things that shouldn't exist were becoming more dangerous by the day. And apparently, a dead researcher was still trying to help people survive them. I need to go back, I said finally, but not alone, and not without backup. Janet smiled for the first time since I'd met her. I was hoping you'd say that. I stayed awake most of the night, staring at Stanley's belongings spread across the conference table. Janet had offered me a cot in one of the back rooms, but sleep felt impossible after everything she'd told me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those impossible shapes from the infrared photo, or heard Stanley's whispered voice from that final video. Janet found me around 6 in the morning, still sitting in the same chair with cold coffee and a head full of questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Couldn't sleep either, she said, settling down across from me with her own cup. She looked like she'd aged 5 years overnight. I keep thinking about what we're asking you to do. You're not asking. I volunteered, remember? That was before you knew Stanley was dead, before you saw what actually killed him. She gestured at the folder. It's not too late to change your mind. I thought about that for a moment. The smart thing would be to walk away, find another job, pretend none of this had ever happened. But the smart thing wouldn't help anyone else who might wander into those woods. Tell me the rest, I said. Everything you haven't told me yet. Janet sighed and opened the folder again. The monitoring operation is funded through a black budget allocation that's been running for 40 years. But recent budget cuts mean they're planning to abandon the site entirely within the next few weeks. Abandon it? What about containing the creatures? That's the problem. The electromagnetic field that's been keeping them in a relatively small area is breaking down naturally. They're getting more hostile and expanding their territory. We've had reports of strange incidents on hiking trails up to 5 miles away. My stomach dropped. How many people know about this? At the federal level, maybe a dozen. Locally, just me, Terry, and now you. She pulled out a map marked with red circles. These are confirmed sightings outside the original containment area in the past 6 months. It's getting worse. The red circles formed a rough pattern spreading outward from the tower like ripples in a pond. Some of them were marked with dates, recent dates. What happens to the hikers and campers who encounter them? Most just report strange sounds or feelings of being watched. But 3 people have gone missing in the past year. Janet's voice was flat, professional. Officially, they're listed as lost hikers. Unofficially, she didn't need to finish. I could imagine what had happened to them. You said Stanley was killed after breaking the rules. Which rule? Janet pulled out Stanley's phone again, but this time she scrolled to a different video file. He recorded everything. This is from earlier that same night, before the final video. The screen showed Stanley sitting at the desk in the tower cabin, speaking quietly to the camera. Day 4379. The electromagnetic readings have been off the charts for the past week. Something's changing in their behavior patterns. They're more active during daylight hours, more aggressive in their approaches to the tower. Stanley looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept in days. I've been following the protocols for 12 years, but I think the rules might be changing too. The old guidelines might not be enough anymore. The video cut to black, then resumed with a timestamp several hours later. Stanley was at the window, filming the forest outside. They're out there now. More of them than I've ever seen at once. And the lights, he adjusted the camera focus. The lights are different, brighter, more organized. In the darkness beyond the window, I could see what he meant. Pinpricks of light were moving between the trees, but they weren't random. They formed patterns, almost like they were communicating. I know I'm not supposed to look directly at them, Stanley whispered, but I need to understand what's happening. For the next person who comes here. Don't, I said to the screen, knowing it was too late. Stanley moved closer to the window, raising the camera to get a better view. The lights were pulsing now, growing brighter and more intense. And then he made the fatal mistake. He looked directly at them without closing his eyes. The video dissolved into chaos. Inhuman sounds, Stanley screaming, the phone clattering to the floor. When the image stabilized, I could see something moving inside the cabin, a dark shape that shouldn't have been able to fit through the door. Janet turned off the phone. Terry found him the next morning. The scene was... She shook her head. He had to clean everything up and stage it to look like Stanley had left suddenly. The jacket hanging on the chair, the coffee mug on the desk, the wallet and keys scattered around. Terry placed all of that to support the resignation story. What about the body? Buried in an unmarked grave about 10 miles from here. Officially, Stanley George resigned his position and moved out of state for personal reasons. The casual way she said it made my skin crawl. How many other unmarked graves are there? 6 over the past 30 years, including Bryce Peterson. I stared at the map with its spreading red circles, thinking about hikers and campers who had no idea what they might encounter in those woods. The rules I've been getting from B. Peterson's email account. You said the government shut down all his systems. That's what I was told, but clearly something's still running. Janet looked genuinely puzzled. The IT department assured me they wiped everything clean after Bryce died. Could someone else be sending them? Someone who knew Bryce? Possible, but unlikely. The information in those emails is too specific, too accurate. It's like whoever's sending them has direct access to current data about the creature's behavior. A thought occurred to me that made my blood run cold. What if the system is still running on its own? What if Bryce programmed it to keep learning, keep adapting? Janet stared at me. That's impossible. Automated systems don't just evolve on their own. Normal automated systems don't. But nothing about this situation is normal. I thought about the increasingly detailed warnings, the urgent tone of the recent messages. What if the electromagnetic anomalies that created the creatures also affected Bryce's computer systems? What if they're still affecting them? Before Janet could respond, her radio crackled to life. Base, this is Santiago. I'm about 20 minutes out with the research team. Over. Janet keyed the radio. Copy that, Terry. We'll be ready. Over. She turned to me. Last chance to change your mind. Once that research team gets here, you're committed. I looked at Stanley's belongings one more time. The wallet with photos of family he'd never see again. The notebook filled with observations that had ultimately gotten him killed. Somewhere in those woods, things that shouldn't exist were becoming more dangerous by the day. I'm going back, I said. But I want to know everything about what happened to the others. Every detail, every mistake they made. If I'm going to survive this, I need to learn from their deaths. Janet nodded grimly. Fair enough, but first, you need to understand something about Bryce Peterson's email system. Recent electromagnetic changes have been causing malfunctions. Incomplete warnings, delayed messages, sometimes contradictory information. That's part of why I had to come see you in person. What kind of malfunctions? The system failed to warn the lookout before Stanley about the creature's increased hostility. It sent outdated behavioral guidelines that nearly got someone killed 2 years ago. And worse, she hesitated. The system appears to be learning from each incident, growing smarter. The emails you've been getting are more detailed and urgent than any previous lookout received. The implications of that hit me like a physical blow. You're saying the system is evolving? I'm saying something is. Whether it's Bryce's original programming or something else entirely, I don't know. But the fact that you're getting real-time updates about changing conditions suggests the system has access to current data. Outside, I could hear vehicles pulling into the parking lot. Terry's voice carried through the building as he directed people to unload equipment. "The research team," Janet said, standing up. "They're here to set up monitoring equipment and collect final data before we abandon the site permanently. You'll be their eyes and ears on the ground." "What kind of data?" "Electromagnetic field measurements, behavioral observations, population counts. Everything we need to understand what's happening before we seal off the area for good." Terry appeared in the doorway, followed by 3 people in outdoor gear carrying cases of scientific equipment. They looked like university researchers, young, eager, and completely unprepared for what they were about to encounter. "Hunter, meet Dr. Sarah Chen, Dr. Marcus Webb, and Dr. Lisa Rodriguez," Terry said. "They'll be working with you over the next few days." Dr. Chen stepped forward, extending her hand. "We really appreciate your cooperation with this project. The data you help us collect could be crucial for understanding electromagnetic effects on wildlife populations." I shook her hand, wondering how much she actually knew about what we'd be studying. "How long have you been briefed on the situation?" "We know there are unusual electromagnetic anomalies in the area that have caused behavioral changes in local wildlife," Dr. Webb said. "Our job is to document the extent of those changes before the site is closed for safety reasons." They had no idea. These researchers thought they were studying some kind of scientific curiosity, not creatures that had killed 6 people over 30 years. "Janet," I said quietly, "do they know what they're really dealing with?" "They know enough to stay safe. The rest they'll learn as needed." Terry was already organizing the equipment, separating it into 2 piles. "We've got permanent monitoring sensors that will stay at the tower to track the electromagnetic field breakdown, and portable data collection devices for immediate research. The permanent stuff will keep running even after we evacuate." Dr. Rodriguez was examining what looked like a sophisticated camera system. "These infrared sensors should give us excellent documentation of nocturnal wildlife behavior. We'll be able to observe without disturbing the natural patterns." If only she knew what those natural patterns actually involved. "How long do we have?" I asked Janet. "The research team needs 3 days minimum to set up their equipment and collect baseline data. After that," she shrugged, "we'll see what the situation looks like." 3 days. 72 hours to help document creatures that shouldn't exist, while following rules sent by a dead man through a computer system that might be evolving on its own. Terry finished organizing the equipment and looked at me seriously. "You sure about this? Once we head back up there, you're committed until the research is complete." I thought about the spreading red circles on Janet's map, about hikers who might encounter these things without any warning or protection, about Stanley's final video and the inhuman sounds that had filled the cabin before the phone went dark. "I'm sure, but I want one thing understood. If the situation gets too dangerous, we evacuate immediately. No heroics, no trying to gather one last piece of data. People's lives are more important than research." Dr. Chen nodded enthusiastically. "Of course, safety is our top priority." She had no idea how dangerous this was going to be. None of them did. But as we loaded the equipment into Terry's truck and prepared for the drive back to the tower, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking into something much worse than anyone expected. The electromagnetic field was breaking down. The creatures were becoming more aggressive. And somewhere in the woods, an automated system was sending increasingly urgent warnings about threats that were evolving faster than our ability to understand them. 3 days to document the impossible before it spread beyond containment. I just hoped we'd all survive long enough to finish the job. The research team was gone by sunrise, their vehicles disappearing down the mountain road like they'd never been there at all. But the tower itself looked different now, bristling with new equipment that hummed and blinked in ways that made my skin crawl. Permanent sensors built right into the structure, designed to keep monitoring even after everyone left. I was making coffee when Janet's truck pulled up around 8. She climbed the stairs, looking like she hadn't slept, carrying a manila folder that was thicker than the last one. "We need to talk," she said, settling into Stanley's chair. "The research team's preliminary data came in overnight, and it changes everything." I poured her coffee and waited. Outside, the forest looked peaceful in the morning light, but I'd learned not to trust appearances here. "The creatures are dying, Hunter. The electromagnetic field that's been sustaining them for 40 years is breaking down faster than we thought. They're not expanding their territory because they're getting stronger. They're doing it because they're desperate." That explained the increasing aggression, the way they'd swarmed around the tower during my first night. "How long do they have?" "Months, maybe less. But here's the problem. Dying doesn't make them less dangerous. It makes them worse." Janet opened the folder and pulled out a series of graphs. "When they're healthy, they follow predictable patterns. They avoid electrical fields, stick to certain territories, follow the behavioral rules we've documented. But as they weaken, they become more erratic, more willing to take risks." I thought about Stanley's final video, the way the creatures had actually entered the cabin. They're getting desperate enough to break their own rules. "Exactly. And your cell booster the other night? That was like ringing a dinner bell. The research team's equipment made it 10 times worse." She pointed to a spike on one of the graphs. "The electromagnetic activity over the past 3 days has been off the charts. We've essentially been advertising the tower as an energy source to creatures that are starving for it." My stomach dropped. "So, they're going to keep coming back?" "They're going to do more than that. The sensors are detecting movement patterns we've never seen before. Coordinated approaches, systematic testing of the tower's defenses. They're learning." I set down my coffee cup, my hands suddenly unsteady. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we're evacuating you tomorrow morning. Terry's coming with a helicopter crew at first light, and we're sealing this place permanently." Janet's voice was matter-of-fact, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "The area will be fenced off and declared a hazardous zone. No more lookouts, no more researchers, no more people." "What about tonight?" "Tonight you follow the rules exactly. Use the emergency protocols if necessary and survive until dawn. The permanent sensors will keep running automatically, so we'll have data on what happens after we abandon the site." I looked around the cabin, Stanley's jacket still hanging on the chair, the coffee mug I'd been using for days, the window where I'd first seen those impossible shapes moving between the trees. "And if they get inside?" Janet reached into her bag and pulled out something I'd never seen before. A handheld device covered in switches and LED displays. "Emergency electromagnetic pulse generator. The research team left it as a backup. If the creatures breach the cabin, this will create a burst strong enough to drive them back temporarily." "Temporarily?" "Long enough for you to get to the roof access and signal for emergency extraction. But Hunter," she looked at me seriously, "this is a last resort. The pulse will drain the device completely and you'll only get one shot." I took the device, surprised by how heavy it was. "How do I know if they're actually inside?" "Trust me, you'll know. The temperature will drop. You'll smell that rotting flower scent and the permanent sensors will start going crazy." She gestured at the new equipment humming around the cabin. The monitoring systems will detect their electromagnetic signatures the moment they cross the threshold. We spent the next hour going over emergency procedures and evacuation protocols. Janet showed me how to use the pulse generator, where the roof access was located, and what signals would bring the helicopter crew if things went wrong. "One more thing," she said as she prepared to leave. "The automated email system has been sending increasingly urgent messages to our servers. Whatever's running Bryce's old programs, it knows something's changing." "What kind of messages?" "Warnings about tonight specifically. Detailed behavioral predictions that are more accurate than anything we've seen before." She paused at the door. "The system is telling us this will be the worst night yet." After Janet left, I spent the afternoon checking and rechecking the emergency equipment. The pulse generator sat on Stanley's desk like a high-tech talisman, its LED display showing full charge. The permanent sensors hummed constantly now, their readings fluctuating in ways that made me nervous. Around 4 o'clock, my phone buzzed with a new email from B. Peterson at cascadefire.gov. Subject: Final Night Protocols. Hunter, tonight they will breach the cabin. This has never happened before, but the electromagnetic disruption has made them desperate enough to overcome their natural avoidance patterns. Do not rely solely on the pulse generator. Use the permanent sensors as weapons. Each monitoring station can generate targeted electromagnetic bursts if you access the manual override controls. Move between stations. Do not stay in one location for more than a few minutes. They will adapt to each defensive position. The roof access is your final escape route, but only use it if the cabin becomes completely compromised. You are the last person who will ever spend a night in this tower. Make it count. B. Peterson. I stared at the email, my blood running cold. The system was predicting that the creatures would actually get inside, something that hadn't happened in decades of monitoring. But the message also gave me something Janet hadn't mentioned. The permanent sensors could be used as weapons. I spent the next 2 hours figuring out how to access the manual override controls on each monitoring station. The research team had built quite an arsenal without realizing it. Sunset came too quickly. I watched the light fade through the cabin windows, knowing this would be my last night in the tower. Tomorrow I'd be back in civilization, and this place would be sealed off forever. The forest went quiet just after dark. Not the gradual settling I'd experienced before, but an abrupt silence that felt like the world holding its breath. The permanent sensors started registering movement almost immediately, multiple contacts approaching from different directions. They were coordinating their approach, just like Janet had warned. The first scratching sounds came around 9 o'clock, but they were different this time. Instead of random clawing at the walls, the sounds formed patterns, systematic testing of weak points, probing for ways inside. The temperature in the cabin began to drop. I moved to the first monitoring station and accessed the manual controls, keeping the pulse generator within reach. Outside, the scratching was getting more intense, accompanied by that familiar rotting flower smell seeping through the walls. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze, the sound of the door handle turning. The creatures had never tried to open the door before. They'd always been stopped by some invisible barrier, some instinctive avoidance of human spaces. But desperation had apparently overcome their natural limitations. The door opened with a soft creak. Cold air rushed into the cabin, carrying the overwhelming stench of decay. The permanent sensors went crazy, their displays flashing red as they detected electromagnetic signatures unlike anything in their databases. Something tall and impossibly thin stepped through the doorway. I triggered the first monitoring station's electromagnetic burst. The creature recoiled with a sound like breaking glass, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it moved to the side, testing the edges of the electromagnetic field. More shapes appeared in the doorway. They were learning, adapting to my defenses in real time. I grabbed the pulse generator and moved to the second monitoring station. triggering another burst. The creatures scattered but regrouped quickly, approaching from different angles. For the next 3 hours, I fought a running battle through the cabin. Every time I used one of the monitoring stations, the creatures would adapt and find a way around it. I moved constantly, never staying in one position long enough for them to corner me. The pulse generator remained my ace in the hole, but I knew I could only use it once. Around midnight, they tried a new tactic. Instead of approaching directly, they began interfering with the monitoring equipment itself. The electromagnetic bursts grew weaker as the creatures somehow dampened the sensor's output. I was running out of options. That's when I noticed something strange. The creatures weren't trying to attack me directly. They were positioning themselves around the electrical equipment, drawn to the energy sources like moths to flame. They weren't hunting me. They were feeding. I triggered the pulse generator. The burst of electromagnetic energy filled the cabin like lightning, sending the creatures fleeing through the door with inhuman shrieks. But as the device powered down, I realized I'd given them exactly what they wanted. A massive dose of the energy they were starving for. They'd be back, and now they knew the cabin was a source of the electromagnetic fields they needed to survive. I spent the rest of the night on the roof, watching the forest and waiting for dawn. The creatures circled the tower constantly, but they didn't try to climb up. Apparently, they'd gotten what they came for. When the sun finally rose over the Cascade Range, I could see Terry's helicopter approaching from the south. The nightmare was almost over. As the helicopter landed in the clearing, I took one last look at the cabin where I'd spent the most terrifying week of my life. The permanent sensors were still humming, still monitoring, still collecting data on creatures that would soon be extinct. Terry helped me load my gear into the helicopter, shouting over the rotor noise. How was the final night? "They got inside," I shouted back, "but the monitoring equipment worked. We got the data." As we lifted off, I watched the tower shrink below us. Within hours, a crew would arrive to seal the access road and post warning signs. The area would become another government secret, another classified location that didn't officially exist. 3 weeks later, I got one final email from bpeterson@cascadefire.gov. Subject, "Thank you. Hunter, the data you helped collect has completed 40 years of research into electromagnetic effects on biological systems. Your survival of the final night provided crucial information about the creature's adaptive capabilities and energy requirements. The monitoring station will continue operating automatically, documenting the final stages of their extinction. Within 6 months, the electromagnetic field will dissipate completely, and the anomalous wildlife will cease to exist. Thank you for your service. The knowledge gained from this project may prove invaluable for future scientific endeavors. The tower stands empty now, but it is no longer haunted. B. Peterson." I never replied to that email. Some conversations are better left unfinished. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder what other government secrets are hidden in remote locations across the country. How many other towers and stations are monitoring things that shouldn't exist, staffed by people who don't know the whole truth? And I wonder if Bryce Peterson's automated systems are still out there somewhere, still learning, still evolving, still trying to protect people from dangers they can't imagine. The tower may be empty now, but the questions it raised will haunt me forever.